So sometimes there's serendipity. In my case, we were out playing a couple games. We were playing a card game, and went and did bocce. And I wanted to be able to score either the card game at home with some friends or this bocce thing. And in both cases, we resorted to paper, and it got kind of messy because we didn't know the score partway through and blah, blah, blah. Although bocce, they only go to 7, so that wasn't a problem. Anyway, so I created this game. I wanted to create a game scoring app that I could run on our phone or iPad or on a web, like a WPA. What is it? Web, whatever it is. Downloadable web app. You have Flutter experience, so that makes it easy. If I get to deliver this on multiple platforms with a single code base, and everybody says vibe coding or LLM coding is the way to go. And it turned out it's really cool, but there were just cases where it was really a bad idea. So I'm a little concerned, but let me show you a demo real quick. So, you know what? Let's start at the top. So this is the app. It runs on iPhone, iOS, Windows, Mac, and web. And so in this case, I'm doing 2 players. We're going to play 14 rounds, and we are going to do the phase 10 version. Actually, I'll just show you real quick. So there's the basic sheet, which just is scoring, right? So you can set a player's name, dog. Oh, man. And here we've got cat. And then here we're going to do 10 points and 20 points. Obviously, this isn't bocce. And here we're going to do 8 points, and we're going to do 4 points. Okay, so it's 30 to 40. Cats are ahead of dogs. Dogs are ahead of cats, and then we can lock these so that nobody can edit that again later by accident. Cool, pretty cool. So, and then you can do things like create a new game but retain their names. You can create a new game and not retain their names. You can erase the names you got. You can do light and dark. And then we can go back and we can change the scoreboard and do phase 10. And in this one, you can pick the different phases, or this could be hands, like if you were playing specific hands. And then you can see which hands you completed. We completed 2 and 3. Why did I do that? Because when you're way over here in the later rounds, you can't see what you've completed in the earlier rounds. So that was actually an ask. Okay, so super easy. Only took me like a week. No, probably have 40 hours in on this thing to get it the way I want, because I didn't know anything about LLM. So let's talk about it a little bit. I will tell you, it helps if you know what libraries you want and what versions, because I wanted to do state management and use RiverPod so I could retain all this state in this Flutter app, and I brought in by default the older version, brought in Provider originally, and I didn't really want Provider. I wanted RiverPod because Provider's is pretty much not maintained anymore. So CoPilot's based on the code that's out there. If there's more code on the old library, you get a problem. I fought a lot for the data table behavior for the score sheet where you saw that scrolling. The default cases just didn't work right with the default table, so I ended up picking a library after hunting around to find the library I wanted. And that helped a bunch, because otherwise it picked libraries where the scrolling didn't work right, or I couldn't get the cells to size the way I needed to. One of the things you'll find out is the agent tends to generate long functions or method when building a UI layout or any layout. I wanted smaller discrete components so I could test them, and also so that the code was more readable when I came back to it later. So I had to do a lot of prompting to extract that code into different functions. It's easy for an LLM to create code, especially large amounts of semi-organized code. I had to provide guidance for the code when I want it to be organized and I want it to be broken into different files. So let me show you real quick. So if we look here, we can see that I created a model directory and had it create a model directory and provider directory. And then all of the components ended up being their own rather than a giant. So anything that was more than like 20 lines of code to make some layout ended up being its own component. And I had to tell it to do that, right? And once you gave it an example, so I started with a clean project and an empty pubspec YAML, which means the config file. And so this partitioning of the reactive pieces also took scope management. So when you do this new game thing, right? If you do new game, this is a reactive app. I wanted to make it where you could create a new game and not erase their names, right? Or I wanted to be able to lock columns and then unlock columns, and that caused reactive changes, and I didn't want it to erase the score when that happened. If I changed the name, I didn't want to lose the score. So it turned out those things were a fair amount of work. I haven't done a lot of reactive programming, and the default was to kind of jam stuff together. So I ended up telling it to like tease different model objects apart and put different notifiers and reactive pieces in there. That was a fair amount of work, actually, a couple days, probably. And this was like a couple hours at a pop. So it was probably like over 4 nights. Like I said, a bunch of times, let's see, the river pod code was finicky. I wanted the code to be testable, and I wanted the widgets to be findable by ID. So in a user interface, you add IDs so that it can be tested and you can find them. And it took a couple different approaches to creating IDs. In some cases, it gave things IDs. In another case, it did field IDs. So you end up with a custom component with a text field inside of it. So this is my name component, which has some semantics and other stuff wrapped around it. And inside it's got a text field. When I pass an ID, does the ID become the ID of the custom component, or does it become the ID of the text field? We ended up with both with that. And I ended up picking an approach where it actually ended up being on the custom component and then having the LLM go and refactor everything to eliminate the ID being passed in. And I probably could have done both. But it turned out that actually impacted the testing, and I had to be smarter about prompting to the testing. There were a lot of iterations around state management with reactive programming to get the lifespan right, and that involves sometimes combining or splitting, like the player, the round, the game config ended up in a couple of. I wanted to get some to get the semantics I wanted, and those are like the read. So this is an accessible app. There were a couple cases where I told it to do something and it did it part way, and then I told it to do the same thing again, and it found another part of the app that it fixed to do the exact same, apply the same change. So after like 2 or 3 times, I actually had what I wanted, but it was kind of weird. And then I wanted to do integration tests. So there's actually integration tests. It actually will run the simulator. You tell it which platform you want, iOS, Android, or like macOS or Linux. And those integration tests, I had problems because the drop list, if you look at the way this works, let me pull up the Android app. If you look at something like this drop list, right, it's scrollable. So if I wanted to get the one at the bottom, I needed to tell it to scroll to it, and that took a whole night to try and figure out how to make that to work, and I still don't really like it. And it's because in Flutter testing, if I'm sitting here where the last one you can see is phase 7, and I say I really want to pick phase 9 from the drop list, it has to scroll the drop list to make that visible. And so that took a while to figure out. And like I said, the keys. So there was kind of, I wanted to do finding by key by default. Sometimes it got the right keys and it found went and looked. Sometimes it went and looked by value. Find this label. I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to do ID because that way if I changed the label, it wasn't a problem. So building robust kind of integration tests was not a lot of work, like 2 nights. And I can even show you this actually now that I think about it. Oh, this is going to take a minute. So I can talk. So if we... Actually, I can do a couple of things here. So let me just, I can show you this in an iPhone that it works. This is one of the things I really like. So that thing will take a minute to run. So if we, to run an integration test, right, you kind of have to decide whether you want to run the integration test in the iPhone simulator, the Android simulator, or whatever. These integration tests work for all of them. Okay, so that means we have the iOS. So there you can see it on an iPhone, right? So this is the same thing on an iPhone. It looks identical. And you can see light and dark work here too, just like before. Okay, so let's kill that. And then it turns out it'll run integration tests. Actually, you know what? Let's, we're going to run the integration test. All of them. And it's going to prompt me to know which, and I'm going to run this on the iPhone simulator I just showed you. Yeah, I'm going to pull this up. This will actually take a few minutes. So we're going to run an integration test. It's actually going to use the launched, if it wasn't launched, it would launch it. It'll use this iPhone as the test bed. And all it does is it goes through and picks a couple different things from the drop list, which it did so fast you can't even see it. It checks the scoring. It validates that it worked. It'll actually run another test here where I think it does the lock unlock. It's so fast you really can't see it. So that's not an awesome demo. Anyway, the point is it really helps if you know what you want, right? And troubleshooting can be really hard if you didn't write the code. And you can see here we're going to do the phase 10 and then we're done. This LLM thing is super cool, but it almost never exactly ended up with, well, probably half the time it ended up with the code I really wanted. So I hope you the best of luck. Flutter's totally cool, and LLM's CoPilot support for Flutter was actually pretty cool also. Have a great day.